Good evening and welcome to the Sustainability and Infrastructure meeting of April 13th, 2022. Please join me in a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Cookie, may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Rowinski?
Here.
Commissioner Robbins?
Here.
Chair Narita? Vice Chair Narita, I'm sorry.
Here.
Chair Lorraine?
Here.
And Commissioner Reyes is absent and excused and is recusing himself due to the agenda item on reach codes.
Thank you, Cookie. Good evening, everyone. Due to the physical distancing protocols in place at this time, we continue to encourage public participation remotely. Information on how to provide public comment is explained at the bottom of the published agenda. There are two ways to participate. You can join the Zoom meeting by clicking at the link at the top of the agenda. Use the raise your hand button in the Zoom meeting to be called on for public comment at the appropriate time. There's also phone-in participation if you call 408-638-0968 with the conference ID 829-4843-9928. The password is #3125573. If you join us by phone and would like to give public comment, you can press *9 to raise your hand to be called on for those appropriate times. And when you are called on, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Then you can state your name and provide your comments. These options for public comment will remain available until I close public comment, either during the general period or at the periods for the one item we have after consent calendar on our agenda today. The general public comment is for items that are not on our agenda tonight. And then there's a specific public comment afterward. With that, I will move ahead to the consent calendar item, which is commission regular meeting minutes approval for the March meeting. I'd like to hear any comments from commissioners on this or a motion to approve, please.
I'll move approval.
I will second.
Thank you very much. Cookie, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Rowinski?
Aye.
Commissioner Robbins?
Aye.
Vice Chair Narita?
Aye.
And Chair Lorraine?
Yes.
The motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. Okay, and now would be the time where we have the general public comment period. This is a public comment period available to the public to give comment on items that are not on our agenda tonight. And just as a reminder, reach codes would be our main item tonight, the building code cycle. So comments not related to that, this is the time to give those. Please raise your hand in the Zoom meeting if you're on the Zoom. I don't see anybody currently on the call. So with that, going once, going twice, and I will close public comment for the general section and move on to our item for tonight, new business, which is sustainability related amendments to the 2022 building code. And with our presenter, Ms. Andrea Chao, sustainability analyst. Welcome back, Andrea, and congratulations.
Well, thank you. Well, good evening. Give me one moment to share my screen and get my PowerPoint going. One more click. Here we go. All right. So good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners, and member of the public. My name is Andrea Chao, and I am the Sustainability Analyst for the City of San Mateo. Tonight's presentation will review reach codes for the 2022 building code. My presentation today will cover the significance of addressing building electrification and electric vehicle readiness in REACH codes, the city's current REACH codes for new construction, and REACH code options for both new construction and existing buildings. The goal of my presentation is to introduce the potential REACH code options for the 2022 building code and hear feedback from the Commission regarding these options. Starting with a little bit of background, I want to explain why are we talking about REACH codes and specifically why building electrification and EV readiness. The city's climate action plan establishes goals to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. This snapshot of our current emissions shows how transportation and the built environment, both commercial and residential, account for most of our emissions in our community. Addressing building electrification and EV infrastructure through REACH codes is a strategy identified in our climate action plan. And in addition, the San Mateo City Council established a city council priority to decarbonize existing buildings and phase out the use of natural gas in buildings by 2030. Local governments can adopt amendments to the building code, also known as REACH codes, to require more sustainable development and address emissions from the transportation and building sectors. REACH codes are typically evaluated every 3 years in line with the state's triennial building code cycle. The last building code was adopted in 2019 and went into effect on January 1, 2022. January 1, 2020. The 2022 building code will be adopted this fall and be effective beginning January 1, 2023. All electric buildings, or building electrification, refers to buildings that have no natural gas service. All electric buildings use electric equipment for space and water heating, clothes drying, and cooking, as shown in this diagram. Building electrification has gained traction in recent years because Peninsula Clean Energy, PCE, San Mateo County's electricity provider, supplies very clean electricity to the community. Currently, PCE provides electricity that is 50% renewable and 100% carbon-free, and PCE is committed to delivering 100% renewable and carbon-free electricity by 2025. While electricity has become cleaner, natural gas is a fossil fuel producing significant emissions. The primary component of natural gas is methane, which contributes emissions with a very high global warming potential. Leakage from natural gas infrastructure adds to emissions, and there are also health and safety concerns associated with the use of natural gas inside homes. Natural gas can produce hazardous gases, and many cooking stoves are not equipped with proper ventilation. The state has established ambitious goals around electrifying vehicles, and by 2035, the sale of all new passenger cars and trucks will be zero emission. The sale of electric vehicles in San Mateo County has grown rapidly over the years, and last year, 20% of new vehicle sales were electric. The lack of at-home charging is considered the primary barrier to EV adoption, so enabling access to EV charging in residential settings is a priority. This diagram shows the levels or speeds of charging that we'll be discussing today. Level 1 is your standard 110 or 120 volt outlet that you see inside your home. Level 2 is a 240 volt outlet. This is either seen in residential settings or can also look like the level 2 EV chargers in a public parking garage or shopping center.
Andrea, excuse me just 1 second. I apologize for interrupting. Through the chair, actually to the chair, Adam, I'm getting text that the meeting isn't transmitting, that it disappeared. So maybe Cookie, we just need to check, and I'm getting texts from people who want to participate.
Yeah,
So,
I've got Millbury TV here and they're checking it. There's a problem. Sorry about that.
okay. Anyway, okay, I'll mute again. Sorry, Andrea. Go back.
No, that's okay. I want to check in on what the best, should I continue my presentation or take a pause? Continue?
What do you think, Cookie?
5-minute pause?
Okay.
2-minute, what do you, I'm
Sure.
checking with the technician here.
Ah,
5 minutes? Okay,
Just
said
as a
5 minutes.
question, is it possible for people to join via Zoom? Is it just the broadcast that's not working, but the Zoom?
The
It's the
Zoom
YouTube.
appears to be working.
It's the YouTube portion that is not working.
I would advise that, I mean, it's okay to take a couple minute pause to see if they can correct things, but because the public can still access the meeting via the Zoom link on the agenda, that, you know, we should be able to continue and have full public access.
that sounds good to me. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to continue my presentation. So I'll continue starting with the different levels and speeds of charging. Level 2, again, is that a 240 volt outlet that is either seen in a residential setting or can often look like level 2 EV chargers in public garages and shopping centers. There's a third level, level 3 DC fast chargers, but this level is not commonly mandated through reach codes. Installing EV infrastructure in new construction is significantly cost saving compared to retrofitting existing buildings. PCE authorized a study to compare these types of costs, and they found that retrofitting to install EV infrastructure later can cost 3 to 4 more times than installing that EV infrastructure at the time of new construction. This is because retrofitting requires costly trenching, wiring, and often additional electrical work. So installing EV infrastructure as part of new construction can save the building owner significant costs compared to retrofitting in the future. So the city already has adopted reach codes for the 2019 code cycle. They address new construction. The city's current reach codes require the installation of solar on building types not covered by the energy code, the construction of all electric residential buildings and all electric buildings with office use, and then a greater percentage of electric vehicle charger readiness than what is required by the state for all building types. The city's current reach codes for new construction will expire at the end of this year on December 31st. In the previous code cycle, Peninsula Clean Energy supported jurisdictions in the adoption of reach codes by providing cost effectiveness studies, model code language, and technical support to the staff. This year, PCE is leading the newly formed Bay Area Reach Codes group that also includes East Bay Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and they are providing the same type of support to local governments. The Bay Area Reach Codes team is developing reach code options focused on building electrification and EV readiness in new construction. It is important to note that reach codes for solar and battery storage are no longer necessary since the 2022 State Energy Code now requires solar and battery storage on all types of new construction. So my next few slides will review the reach code options for new construction. In 2020, the city of San Mateo required the construction of all electric buildings for the first time. This requirement applies to specific building types. It applies to all new residential buildings and all new buildings with office use. Also in that code cycle, over 50 cities throughout the state started adopting standards for all electric construction. So as stated earlier, electrifying buildings is extremely important since we have very clean electricity and it avoids the use of natural gas, which is the fossil fuel. Much of the debate in 2019 and 2020 focused heavily on providing exceptions for specific types of end uses, including commercial kitchens and stoves or outdoor fire pits. The Bay Area Reach Codes team recommends minimizing exceptions for specific equipment, given the availability of electric technology. Further, the installation of gas infrastructure to service one piece of equipment diminishes the project cost savings of not installing gas infrastructure. It also creates an investment in new gas infrastructure, which doesn't align with the city's goal to phase out natural gas in buildings by 2030. Instead, the Bay Area Reach Codes group recommends establishing a process and criteria for granting exceptions. So that way there is a pathway in cases where building electric is completely infeasible. Currently, the city's Reach Code does include an infeasibility exemption process, and to date, this has not been used. Staff recommends that adoption of the Bay Area Reach Code's model code language to require all new construction be all electric, and also establish a process and criteria for granting exceptions. Moving on to EV infrastructure. In an earlier slide, I explained the difference between the different levels and speeds of charging. I wanted to share more about the different types of EV readiness. This EV terminology is summarized in Table 1 of the staff report, but I'm hoping this diagram also provides a clearer picture of those definitions. EV capable means there is panel capacity and raceway or conduit, but that the circuit or receptacle is not yet installed. EV ready means a space is readily available to be plugged into with an EV charger. And then finally, the code can also require that a space, an EV charging space, include EVSE, which is electric vehicle supply equipment installed, so that the driver does not have to bring their own equipment. The state has continued to increase EV readiness requirements every 3 years. This table summarizes the 2019 state code, the city's current Reach Code requirements, and the 2022 state code requirements. For single family and two-family homes, two-family townhomes, the 2022 state code requires one level 2 EV capable space per dwelling unit. This had not changed since the 2019 state code. For multifamily, it requires 5% level 2 EV charging spaces, 25% level 2 EV ready spaces with low power, 10% level 2 EV capable spaces. So that's a total of 40% of spaces that are impacted. For non-residential, the 2022 state code requires 5% of level 2 EV charging spaces and 15% level 2 EV capable spaces, impacting 20% of spaces. So the city has the opportunity to reach beyond the 2022 state code with Reach Codes. The state offers Reach Code options for jurisdictions to adopt called Cal Green Tiers, and the Bay Area Reach Codes team provided their own recommendation. For single family and two-family townhomes, currently the city's Reach Code requires one level 2 EV ready space per dwelling unit. Staff recommends adoption of the Bay Area Reach Codes option, which has the same requirement, one level 2 EV ready space per dwelling unit. And in addition, it requires one level 1 EV ready space would be required if the development includes more than one parking space. This really ensures sufficient charging access. For multifamily buildings, the city's current Reach Code requires 15% level 2 EV capable spaces. The Cal Green Tier Reach Code options go beyond the state code to require a higher percentage of EV readiness in spaces. The Cal Green Tiers concentrate the availability of charging spaces of chargers in a limited number of spaces. The Bay Area Reach Codes group focuses on ensuring every residential unit has access to EV charging and relies on level 1 outlets. Again, level 1 outlets are the standard outlets you see inside your home. According to a California Air Resources Board study, 50% of EV drivers today rely on level 1 charging to meet their needs. PCE also assessed EV charging needs at multifamily properties and found that in residential settings, cars are typically parked for more than 12 hours. Given the average commute for a Bay Area resident is approximately 25 to 35 miles per day, charging needs can often be satisfied with a level 1 charger, avoiding more expensive electrical capacity needs. Staff recommends the Bay Area Reach Code's code option for multifamily buildings to ensure charging is accessible to all residential units. For non-residential buildings, the city's REACH code requires 5% of level 2 EV charging spaces and 10% of level 2 EV capable. Again, the Cal Green tier options recommend a higher percentage of EV readiness, and their Cal Green tier options have a recommendation for all uses. The Bay Area REACH codes option provides a recommendation specific to office use and a recommendation for all other uses. And the option for office use requires a higher percentage of EV readiness in 50% of spaces compared to the option for all other uses. Staff recommends adoption of the Bay Area REACH codes option for non-residential buildings because the policy focuses on increasing charging in office buildings, where most charging is likely to occur after at-home charging. The city has a strong history of applying REACH codes to new construction, but new construction represents a small fraction of the built environment in San Mateo. Decarbonizing existing building stock is key to reach the city's ambitious climate goals, but addressing the existing building stock can be challenging. So when developing existing building policy, there are a few policy considerations. Alongside mandates implemented through REACH codes, staff will have to prioritize working with partner agencies to provide outreach and education to the community on the benefits of electrification, exploring financing options for converting to electric equipment, and supporting workforce training to install electric equipment. The Bay Area REACH Codes team also emphasizes the need to consider equity to ensure that electrification REACH codes do not negatively impact underserved communities. Upfront costs to convert to new technology and electric equipment is often the primary barrier for our underserved communities. In addition, electricity prices are currently higher than natural gas prices, so homes with electric equipment may have higher utility bills. So when analyzing these measures, we should consider the cost burden that the measures have on everyone in our community. Finally, anecdotally, we know that there are projects that require a permit that do not necessarily go through the permitting process. This could be because sometimes people do not know to get a permit or because they're intentionally evading a permit. The following slides will introduce a variety of measures to increase electric readiness and require electric equipment in existing buildings. These are all measures that would be in force at the time of a permit application. Currently, staff does not have a recommendation on what measures to adopt. Staff worked with the Bay Area REACH Codes group to identify a variety of measures that show potential in terms of cost effectiveness. And staff is awaiting more cost effectiveness information and additional discussion with our building department on the implementation process. But we're very interested to hear your feedback and direction on this preliminary analysis. The first two measures on the list focus on increasing electric readiness at particular triggers. So the first measure is triggered by the upgrade or installation of a new electric panel and requires the reservation of breaker space for future electric equipment. Electrical capacity is key to future electrification of a building systems. By requiring the reservation of breaker space when a building owner is already making changes to their panel, gas equipment can more easily be converted to electric at the end of equipment life. The second measure requires the installation of electrical outlets at the time of kitchen or laundry room renovation if a gas appliance is installed. This means at least one outlet capable of serving electric equipment is located within 6 feet of the kitchen stove during a kitchen renovation or near a clothes dryer during a laundry room renovation. The heat pump air conditioning measure requires the installation of a heat pump air conditioning unit at time of replacement of an existing unit or installation of a new air conditioner. This measure would apply to residential buildings and to commercial buildings with air conditioning units up to 30 tons of airflow. So instead of a traditional air conditioning condensing unit, a building owner would need to install a heat pump unit. For residential installations, incentives make the heat pump option less expensive than the installation of an air conditioner plus a new gas furnace. Heat pump air conditioning enables electrification of space heating. If sized appropriately, the building owner will no longer require a gas heating system after the heat pump is installed. The heat pump pool heating measure would require the installation of a heat pump pool water heating equipment when a new pool is installed at an existing residential building. If a new pool is installed as part of a new residential building, that is a new construction reach code. Okay, so compared to the traditional gas pool heater, the electric option can cost more, roughly $800 or $1,300 more, and installation could possibly trigger an electrical panel upgrade depending on the size of the pool. The City of Santa Monica's cost effectiveness study found it is cost effective to require this measure in their climate zone, and a study is currently underway for San Mateo's climate zone. Our last measure here is a heat pump water heating measure that would require the installation of a heat pump water heater at the time of replacement. With available incentives, the installation of a heat pump water heater instead of gas equipment would cost roughly $2,500 more or higher. There are some specific challenges with replacing a gas water heater at time of failure with a heat pump system. This is largely because, while a gas water heater can quickly be replaced with another piece of gas equipment within 24 hours, there is a different process to convert to electric. So in order to convert to a heat pump water heater, property owners would need to hire an electrician to install the required wiring, potentially upgrade their electrical panel before the heat pump equipment is installed. This process can take several days or even weeks, depending on the availability of both contractors and equipment. So there is a pilot going on by Stop Waste in Alameda County, who is currently piloting an equipment loan program that provides short-term loans of gas water heaters until the heat pump water heater is installed. This is largely because building occupants would have to live without hot water during the conversion and installation process to a heat pump system. So this type of program could make the conversion process much easier, but it is not currently available in San Mateo County. Another challenge with heat pump water heaters is the sizing and siting. Because the heat pump water heater is somewhat slower than a gas-fired water heater, manufacturers may recommend replacement of a 40-gallon gas-fired water heater with a 60 to 80-gallon heat pump water heater. This increase in physical size might make it more complex to site that heat pump water heater, especially considering many water heaters are currently located in someone's garage, but homeowners need to make sure there's sufficient space to replace the system in the garage without encroaching on parking clearance. Reach codes can be adopted at any time. However, it is optimal to adopt a reach code at the beginning of a code cycle to maximize the time that policy is in effect. Staff recommends that new construction reach codes be adopted by the end of the year so that the current new construction reach codes for building electrification and EV readiness do not lapse. Since there are currently no reach codes pertaining to existing buildings, our timeline is a little bit more flexible. And so we can use additional time to develop the policy option for existing buildings. Because this is the first time the city will consider reach codes that impact existing buildings, there might be a need for additional analysis and discussion. And if needed, staff recommends separating new construction and existing building reach code efforts to ensure new construction reach codes are prioritized and adopted by the end of the year. Staff seeks Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission feedback on the reach code options for new construction and existing buildings. Based on the commission feedback, staff can return to the commission for additional discussion. Staff aim to present the commission's recommended reach codes for consideration at a city council study session in July, but this date is flexible. We do want to return to city council with an ordinance for adoption though by the end of the year. I have two summary slides here that we can really use to help facilitate discussion. So this summary slide shows staff's recommendation for new construction reach codes. And then I also have a summary slide on existing buildings. So thank you for your time. That concludes my presentation, and I'll let the chair open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And just for the public, as a reminder, what will happen next is we'll ask the commissioners for questions on the presentation first, and then we'll go to public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the commission for commissioner comments after that. And with that, I'd like to ask the commissioners to please raise their hand if they're ready to ask questions. We can start with Commissioner Robbins. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Thank you very much, Andrea. Excellent as always. On the building side of things, all electric buildings, this particularly I'm thinking commercial here, the process for exceptions, do we have a recommendation either from the Bay Area team or some model codes for how to do that? That could be, I think, very important. Do we have any input there?
Yes, so the Bay Area Reach Codes team did develop language to establish a criteria for processing exceptions. So we have that language to review and provide comments to. Do you have specific concerns about commercial buildings?
Well, I do. It's restaurants, of course, the big one. But
Okay.
I'm kind of jumping ahead to the comment part, and I apologize, Chair. Just I think that's something we should look at. More importantly, staff should really make sure that stakeholders are involved in that process, because a good process can be fair and equitable and get a good result. A process that turns out to be a little kludgy could, freeze a lot of people out, and we have a lot of businesses in this city that I think are going to need appropriately some sort of exceptions over time, at least in the early stages. That's that. My second question, you've partially answered it, but this is on the multifamily EVs, the charging preparation, if you will. And I wonder if you could maybe put that chart up again that showed the recommended, it was a 40% and a 60%, but it had a level 1 EV readiness component. And I really wanted to ask whether any serious consideration has been given to bump that to level 2. I will tell you, as a longtime EV user, level 1 is so 5 years ago, and level 2 is, and I can give you a comment. I apologize again, Chair, that I'm giving comment here, but basically what we're talking about is the same thing you have in your every kitchen code and every washer dryer room. It's just a 240 type outlet. There are a lot of flavors of it, and there are different amperages, but we require that. You can't build a kitchen out with a way to plug your fridge in. I don't know why we would let people stick with an old-fashioned plug 110. Okay, so I apologize, I jumped ahead with my comment, but have we looked into that? Or has staff really looked into, I guess really it's a cost issue about jumping from a level 1 ready to level 2 ready?
I'd have to follow up on the cost difference because the level 1 option is cost saving compared to level 2. So I'd have to understand better what that cost differential would be.
Okay, yeah, something I would recommend looking into because it isn't huge, particularly if we're talking volumes and code. And I apologize, Adam, that I've gone into comment, and I promise that I will repeat those comments later. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks for the warning, Commissioner. All right. Who would like to go next? Suppose we don't, if those do not have questions, that is fine. There we go. I think I saw Commissioner Rowinski just beat it out with a physical hand wave. Please, thank you. Oh, but I believe you're still muted. So we don't know what you're saying.
Okay, just a few, I have some questions here. I'm going to just focus in on new right now. I think existing is actually both in my mind, both new and existing need further discussion than this meeting. But I want to go back with a point that Commissioner Robbins just made. And also Andrea in your presentation. It mentions the proposed reach codes for all new construction. The Bay Area Reach Code team recommends cities do not allow for blanket exemptions and instead establish a process and criteria to grant exceptions. What would be an example of a blanket exemption and why wouldn't that be allowed? Why are they recommending not to do that?
Right. So an example of a blanket exemption would be requiring the all electric construction of all single family homes and allowing for the installation of gas fire pits or allowing for the installation of a gas stove. It is recommended that you do not provide blanket exemptions for specific end uses because there are electric alternatives. In the case of a gas stove, there are electric induction stoves that can serve as an alternative.
Right.
It also
Okay.
goes back to if you install allow the installation of one piece of gas equipment, you still have to install that gas infrastructure. So then you're installing new gas infrastructure, which doesn't align with the city's goal to phase out natural gas infrastructure by 2030 in all buildings. And then you're still not then gaining that cost savings from the avoided gas infrastructure installation. Okay.
All right. Okay, then, and this is something Commissioner Robbins brought up. And I think you've mentioned, he had suggested, I agree, that we need to see what the process and criteria is and that has been developed or has not been developed.
Yes, there is draft language for language around exceptions.
Right. And I guess we'll see that at another meeting, I hope. Does that process, and you had mentioned earlier something of that process, there is a way to determine infeasibility for a new construction to not go electric?
Right, so there is language if a project is finding that it is infeasible to build electric. There's language to address that so that the project can still be built. And maybe end up using gas infrastructure as needed.
Right. And that would be also something to look at is what the infeasibility language is. Do you know if it's economically related? That is, this doesn't economically pan out?
It looks specifically at specific end uses that are challenging to electrify. So those are like industrial process loads. That's the specific language.
Okay, so it's primarily industrial related, not residential related.
Right.
In terms of, all right. I'm very interested because I will share with you, our household applied to PCE to participate in a heat pump water heater pilot program, and we were turned down. We were turned down because our usage is low and it was economically infeasible to install in our existing home that heat pump water heater. So I was curious if there's economics involved. I'm hearing you say no, economics is not involved to determine whether electrification is feasible or not. Okay, but there are other criteria to do that available.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is the feasibility, the feasibility that is criteria to grant, that is the city's process and criteria, is any infeasibility is not related to economics. It's related to other matters.
Yeah, the exceptions language focuses on the end uses that are specifically challenged to electrify. So that
Right.
goes back to things like industrial process loads.
Right. Okay. All righty. For new construction, does it also include ADUs and JADUs?
If an ADU is considered new construction, then yes.
Okay. And
So
a
if
JADU?
a junior ADU is often a conversion, so it is categorized as an alteration.
Okay. All right, that might fall into, all right, and as an alteration, would that fall into the existing category or no category? Or does it matter?
It could fall into, I mean, yeah, it
Yeah.
could fall into an existing building
Yeah, I
category.
just don't know where JADUs would fall into. We've just gone through 8-9 months of ADU, JADU ordinance, so it's top of mind for me.
I think it would depend on the intervention point or the trigger point that we use in our existing building policy, if that makes sense.
And maybe that can be looked into if we're not quite sure on that. Like I said, the city has spent several months going through this entire process and coming up with a new JADU and ADU ordinance to move forward on. Let's see. I'll tell you. I have a little. Let me kind of ask you this. So I'm building a home, and let's say I have to put in some sort of, at least according to what's being proposed, a 1 level, 2 EV capable space per dwelling unit, and that was in our 2019 reach codes as well. So essentially, if I'm building a home and I don't have an EV car, I still have to put this in, even though I may not use it.
Yes, in the new construction of a new home, you are required to install 1 level 1, or I'm
Right.
sorry, 1 level 2 EV ready space.
Right. And let me, something that I'm starting to get a little concerned about, and you and I spoke about it this afternoon. I think Commissioner Robbins brought this up a while ago, was costs to new construction. And when we're talking about new construction, we're talking homes, townhomes, multifamily, including hotels, storefronts, and I'll say commercial, and then office. Could some of these proposals get so expensive that we start to dissuade new development? I don't know if there's any way to, that's a big question. I'm not quite sure I don't think it's an easy one to answer.
Well, I will say that cost effectiveness is a large part of the process of developing reach codes. So it's ensuring that the benefits outweigh the costs of these measures that we're evaluating and implementing.
Right. So do you run a cost effective study for every new development?
No, I'm sorry, that we use a cost effectiveness study to evaluate the measures that we will impose on development.
Okay. And
so all of the measures that we will adopt will be cost effective.
Okay. And what study is that? And I have to say, that's a pretty important study there, because it is stating that all of entire electrification of all new constructions
Yes,
is cost effective.
yes.
Have you run that study by developers, home builders?
So I did do some outreach to developers in San Mateo, and I received one response. And we had a discussion about the electric vehicle readiness reach codes. So I guess you had two questions. So the cost effectiveness study for the electrification measures is available. It's readily available and it's something I can send you after
Actually, I would
this
send it
meeting.
to the entire commission and possibly
Sure.
post it. So some of the people who are, I see there's folks, we have the residents, they could also access it as well. That I think would be useful, but I think, studies are great, but also getting outreach or input from the real world is just as effective. Because we're now really moving into a whole new genre here for new construction, particularly based on what the Bay Area Reach Code team is recommending and what staff is recommending. Personally, I'd like to see more outreach on this, and I'll bring that up during my comment.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, I agree
yeah.
that stakeholder engagement is really important. I do want to clarify, though, these new construction reach codes is not something that is completely new to the city, since we have currently building electrification and EV readiness reach codes in place right now.
Yes, I see that. Because I'm looking at our 2019 right now for,
Right.
yeah, but it's a material jump from where we are to what the Bay Area Reach Code team would like us to go, a material jump. That's what has my attention. And as I mentioned to you when we spoke this afternoon, I am a supporter of reach codes, but I also want reach codes to facilitate development, not reduce development. I would like it to be a win-win for everyone. So, but yes, where we are now and what staff is recommending to me is a big goal, a big jump. And like I said, I'd like to have reach codes for existing homeowners, not dissuade them from submitting permits, not illegally doing work without permits. And I cited two examples that I'm concerned of. And on the new construction, these reach codes could invite developers in, enhance the building here in the city of San Mateo, not dissuade them from building in the city of San Mateo. So that's my, that's the genesis of my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your questions. Please go ahead, Vice Chair Narita.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrea, so much for the presentation, and welcome back. Just a couple basic things so I understand. The current City of San Mateo Reach Code, you mentioned there's an expiration date. And so if nothing else happens, then when do we revert back to like the California state code?
Sure. Yeah, the adopted reach codes will expire on December 31st of this year. So that is the end of the building code cycle. So if no reach code is adopted, we would revert to the state code beginning January 1 of 23.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then what exactly is the composition of the Bay Area Reach Code model code team? Is it staff members within Peninsula Clean Energy and the East Bay and Silicon Valley Clean Energy? Is it like staff people who are building experts? Could you give me a little bit of their profile?
Yeah, sure. It includes staff on each of the different community choice energy teams. It also includes an energy consultant group called TRC, and the county agencies are also involved.
Okay, great. And what is the coordination that this group, if any, has with the California Energy Commission, who's in charge of helping provide, the state level building code? Because
I think they're
TRC, for instance, they're the
Yeah.
same consultants who are doing the cost effectiveness tests for both, right?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you, Commissioner Rita, for pointing that out. Yes, they are. So TRC is very involved, and since they are also the agency providing cost effectiveness studies, they're already connected with the California Energy Commission. So everything is very coordinated.
And is the idea with the Bay Area Reach Code model code recommendation, the hope is that many cities, ideally all the cities, theoretically, the goal of the group, not the goal of the group would be that all the cities would adopt similar codes to each other to, one, provide certainty to the developer community, and two, to not create any kind of chilling effect for development, because everyone would actually be under the same code style or like rigor. Is that like the theory of change there?
I think that, one benefit is with a unified code is that there's less differences across the region. I think one major benefit from the local government perspective is this idea of this very helpful shared resource. 2 code cycles ago, San Mateo was endeavoring to do reach codes on our own. So we had to pay for our own consultant, TRC even then, to do a cost effectiveness study that was specific to San Mateo. So now that's done statewide. And then these regional resources are really customized to our local agencies.
That's great. And so, in terms of costs, one of the things that I'm thinking about is the reason. One of the things I know about for all electric buildings is that because for new construction, you don't have to do the gas piping, which is actually tens of thousands of dollars. That actually is one of the reasons why all electric buildings are so cost effective, because that piping is actually quite expensive. Is that still accurate? My information is like 4 years old. Okay. And so when we think about the electric vehicle part, though, when it comes from the 15% for level 2 EV capable right now, let's say in multifamily housing, to the recommendation by the Bay Area Reach Code, 40% level 2 actual install, right? And then 60% level 1 EV ready. Does that still pencils out as cost effective under the TRC tests that are the TRC consultant studies, or is the EV charging piece like separate from the building, the actual building piece?
The EV infrastructure is separate from the analysis of electrification measures. There was a study done to compare the costs for, and they used a 100 dwelling multifamily building as the prototype. And so with the 2022 Cal Green, I went to the 2022 state code requirements for EV readiness. The EV infrastructure cost was $127,000. And to implement the 2022 model reach code from the Bay Area Reach Codes group, it is $167,000. So there is an increase from the state code.
Oh, that's much smaller than I thought it was going to be, though. That's pretty good.
Yeah, so each scenario is, it's still a very small percentage of the total construction costs. And I should loop back to clarify. The reason level 1, well, there are multiple reasons that Peninsula Clean Energy is encouraging the use of level 1. And one is that it's cost savings compared to level 2 because of the panel capacity and the panel capacity required for level 1 versus level 2.
And, when it comes to affordable housing, what was the kind of considerations and decision that, meant that, the affordable housing had lower percentages of actual charging infrastructure than what I assume is market rate of multifamily housing?
Right.
Because to me, it would be like more, we need to get the programming so that affordable housing has the same quality of service. as a market rate multifamily, but I'm curious what the code team thought.
Yeah, there were two. So for multifamily, there is a market rate multifamily suggestion or recommendation, and one for affordable housing. And there was discussions directly with affordable housing developers to get to that model code. And I apologize, I don't really know more than that, but I know that PC went through some specific stakeholder outreach to affordable housing developers to reach that recommended code language.
And are the groups, are the community choice aggregation groups providing or planning to provide an increase of incentive programs or rebate programs or associated support as these codes are rolled out more aggressively?
So PCE already provides a specific heat pump water heater rebate. So that already exists, and I'm not sure of the plan to provide additional rebates in the future.
Okay, and then I have one question on existing building. That was all for new construction codes, but for the existing building code piece, my question is, have you as staff or in the community of conversation talked about or discussed, instead of trying to have instead of requiring electric equipment, having people pay to stay on gas instead? Because the reason why I ask is because you basically are outlining we have 8 years to less than 8 years to achieve this goal of getting off gas in buildings in San Mateo, which is incredibly ambitious. And so but when you have a retrofit on a building, usually those retrofits last for decades beyond the 8 year. Ideally, if it's done well, it would last beyond the 8 years we have for this goal, right? You don't want to retrofit and have to do it again in 5 years. So any retrofit that happens between now and 2030, it must be excellent in one of two ways: either all electric, retrofit, or the retrofitter absorbs the cost of staying on the gas infrastructure while the city is giving us an 8-year lead time to move off of it. So, or more than an 8-year lead time, but you know what I mean? So has that kind of framing come up in the conversation at all? Because I noticed everything is about trying to make the electric equipment sound competitive to gas. But the fact of the matter is that we've been subsidizing gas for generations, and we now have 8 years to try to finish it. We actually need to start to rethink our relationship with gas overall as a city, to hit this goal in 8 years.
So yeah, that's a great question. I think the short answer is no, we haven't explored that option.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I see Commissioner Rowinsky has raised her hand. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just focused on my questions on new construction, and then I heard Commissioner Rita bring up her questions on existing, and I do have questions on existing. Actually, I have larger concerns on existing than I do on new construction. So Andrea, and I'm going to share with everyone, I've been through, our household has been through, and I'm going to preface my questions on this, a trial through PCE. I'm looking for homes that would participate in a trial for a heat pump water heater. And we threw our hat in the ring, and we were declined. And we were declined because of our low usage. It just wasn't economically feasible. So for our house to have installed, to remove our gas powered water heater and install a heat pump water heater. So it was just economically infeasible, and we weren't brought into the trial. However, then after that, my husband and I, this is where I'm going to have some questions here, Andrea. We went out and we said, well, we'll explore what it's going to take to install a heat pump water heater, and we'll price it. Maybe we'll do it, and within the context of the available rebates. And what we found, and I shared this with you, but I think it's important to understand, is the cost to take out a gas, most homes are gas powered water heaters. And this, by the way, is a very common permit for the city. In fact, it's one of the most common permits, speaking with the permitting folks today, that the city receives. And so what we found is the cost to take out a gas powered water heater and put in a heat pump. The cost to do that, the heat pump was 6 to 10 times more than the gas powered. And that the rebates didn't cut, because part of it is you've got to put in a whole new electrical system. You have to disengage and remove the gas system. It is a big undertaking that, frankly, Mike, that current rebates just aren't available to cover. And so if I've got families who need a new water heater and they go through the permitting process, and then all of a sudden they're now burdened with this cost on the heat pump water heater, never mind the fact, and you brought up a very good point, Andrea, and that's true. You are out of hot water for anywhere from 5 to 10, 12 days. And you talked about a loaner, and I'm sure that's not for free. So there's more costs than that. So it just became economically infeasible for us. And I'm really concerned, as I mentioned to you, you talked about ESG communities. I have, as I talked about, I have 2 older people, and where I live, I have a lot of seniors and I have a lot of working class people where I live in San Mateo. Both parents work, they're sending their kids to school. And if they have to, or these seniors have to pull a permit for a water heater, for example, and then get burdened with these costs, I mean, how do we get around that? Or is there a way to get around that? Can we remove water heaters from your list of those appliances that you outlined? I just don't see it very practical. And with rebates, the thing with rebates is that they're transitory. They could be here today, gone in a few months. There may not be enough that was once available. Maybe at one point it was $2,000. Now that's all that's available is $1,200. And all of that comes out of Sacramento. So on the existing side, and maybe we have more discussion on that, but I'm sharing with you, and you and I spoke about this, but I'd like the rest of the commission to hear that I just can't see how some of this is going to work out, given the availability of, or the lack of availability of rebates. I mean, what would you think of this? What if these programs cease to exist if no rebate money is available for existing structures? Is that a possibility?
So there are currently rebates available and that is what I think is necessary to ensure that an existing policy is equitable, right? That there are both financial incentives and maybe financing mechanisms to help ease this transition to electrification. So I think that is an important component of any future building electrification policy.
Right. Now, what if rebates become unavailable?
I guess I can't speak to the longevity of the rebate programs, but the goal of the rebates.
Yeah, maybe these updates aren't done. I will share with you, there's 2 older people in my neighborhood who need to submit permits for some major work, and they're concerned about this. And I'm concerned about permit evasion. I don't want them, people should not evade submitting permits because of something like the heat pump or the air conditioner. But that is a concern, and I've heard it. So I'll just share that with you. But maybe when rebates are not available, maybe these programs are not available, or the city pays for it. I don't think that's unlikely. That's likely, but you know, we want to make this, we want to have our residents do these upgrades and move them into the electrical future. But I don't mean, I'm concerned about making things overbearing or onerous financially.
Thank you, Commissioner. With all due respect, we will have time for
Okay,
comments.
thank
Do you
you.
have any other questions? Okay. Thank you. Let me see what questions I might have. Andrea, I had, I think just a potential reminder getting back to a little bit to some of the discussion about cost as we look at what the overall cost of these measures might bring with regard to EVs. I think part of the idea is based on the notion that we likely need to install more EV charging parking spots in general anyway, as you mentioned with the state of California, you know, eventually selling only non-fossil fuel cars beginning in 2035. And if we wait to do retrofitting for EV charging spots after something is constructed, it's much more expensive. Is that's part of this cost effectiveness discussion, right?
Yes.
Very good. So I think I'd like to just ask a couple questions about additional measures we might consider for existing construction reach codes beyond what we've already discussed. Could the city consider more broad rebuild or remodel or retrofitting triggers for existing construction, maybe something like what the city of Burlingame, I understand, has implemented? And could you maybe explain a little bit about like maybe your thoughts on how, like, whether the city could do something similar?
Right. So, okay, the existing existing building measures that I presented today were triggered either by a specific type of like kitchen or laundry room renovation or a electric panel upgrade, or by the time of a equipment replacement. So I think Chair Lorraine is getting at this idea of a more general trigger, like a major remodel or retrofit trigger. So I think the city of Burlingame's current reach code for new construction also had added some language that requires that major renovations or additions that are 50% or more of the property value, and also include heating and cooling as part of their scope. They require that heating and cooling system be electric. So that's one possible trigger and like the associated measure. That's one example with the city of Burlingame. The city of Piedmont and the city of Chula Vista are other examples that have another definition of a major renovation. Sometimes it's a dollar amount or square footage. And they require that the project applicant choose from a list or a menu of energy efficiency and electrification measures. And this allows the project applicant to choose specific measures that best matches the scope of their own project. So that is another possible existing building measure that was not presented today on the slide. But yeah.
But we could consider that as well.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Similarly, could we got a public comment in discussing potentially having point of sale triggers, and similar to what we ended up putting into place with the sewer lateral ordinance. Could the city potentially consider triggers like those as we continue this discussion on possible measures for existing construction?
Yes, so there are lots of different policies that a city can take to address existing buildings. Tonight, we focused on just reach code measures, which are amendments to the building code. This previous measure that we just talked about is another type of reach code, so that's something that we could add to our list. A point of sale trigger might look something more like a municipal ordinance. There are two examples that come to mind, the city of Piedmont and city of Berkeley. I do want to clarify, though, that the point of sale ordinances typically focus on disclosing energy or building performance. So for each of those cities, they require either a home energy score, a home energy audit, or some sort of energy assessment be disclosed at the time that building is sold. So it's more around transparency and disclosure of information.
Okay, thank you. Could the city consider an end of flow date for gas use as the city of Half Moon Bay recently has, and I know some other cities and counties are looking into?
Yes, this is another policy that the city could consider that would, yeah.
Excellent. And one final question from me would be about whether we might be able to, I think as I've heard a number of questions from Commissioner Rowinski and to some extent perhaps Commissioner Robbins discussing some of the cost tensions and pressures that some of what we're discussing may burden residents with. Could we potentially explore language that puts replacement measures in for existing buildings such as heat pump water heaters into code now as we consider rules to take effect in January? Well, yeah, I don't want to mess up the language, but essentially pass reach codes that indicate we intend to shift to this replacement to electric at this time as we're considering this, but have the actual execution or implementation date be delayed a bit to, rather than January 1st, 2023, maybe the 2024 or whatever might allow for more of a ramping up for outreach and education that was described near the beginning of your presentation, and perhaps more funding that might come from Bay Area groups, the CCEs, or even like, as I feel like we've seen over the last few years and cycles, innovations or breakthroughs in cost or something to that effect that might sort of narrow the gap.
Yeah, I think we could explore some sort of date certain ordinance, like having an equipment replacement by a date certain or some sort of phasing. I think that's something I'd need to do more research on to understand what other jurisdictions have taken on. When I had put some thought into your question, thank you for sending some of these questions in advance. It did remind me of how requiring certain upgrades is sometimes coupled with building benchmarking ordinances. And the example I had found was the city of Brisbane requires benchmarking of commercial buildings over 10,000 square feet. And then they have a portion of the program called beyond benchmarking requirements. And this happens in phases where the specific buildings need to meet certain building efficiency and performance metrics in future years. So that's another kind of policy approach.
Excellent, thank you. And with that, I would like to go to public comment. I believe before we open up to individuals, Cookie, my understanding is we have a group presentation that may begin first.
Yes, we do. And just give me a second so I can promote them so they can share their screen.
Thank you.
Okay, I have promoted Robert Whitehair and Megan Strain. So you can share your screen.
Robert, do you want to share your screen? Oh, there we go.
And I have to unmute too. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Well, thank you for allowing us this opportunity tonight to talk about this very important subject. Chair Lorraine, members of the commission, thank you for this opportunity and welcome back, Andrea. Our group, San Mateo Climate Action Team, decided rather than have many people speak, we thought it would be better to make this short presentation. We applaud all that the city has done at Reach Codes in the last 6 years and its climate action plan. We applaud the adoption of the City Council objective for 2022-23, establish policies to decarbonize existing buildings and infrastructure and eliminate methane use by 2030. We applaud the city's work plan to carry that out. If we may be so bold, we intend to offer some suggestions about how to make the work plan a success and how to meet the 2030 deadline. You will hear a lot about a proposed two-pronged approach in adoption of new building electrification codes in 2022. In essence, we are going to propose a new construction Reach code beginning on January 1st, 2023, and then a existing building construction Reach code that would be effective January 1st, 2026. I'm happy to announce too that tomorrow, if all goes well, we will turn on our last piece of gas equipment, or equipment replacement. We've replaced our heat pump water heater. We've replaced in my house, in a 71-year-old house, our stove. We got rid of the gas dryer. We use a clothesline. And we also, tomorrow, will be hopefully turning on our heat pump for space heating. We were lucky enough to get some rebates from PCE and also from PG&E. Without the rebates, we would not been able to do it. We are a group of people in San Mateo who are also passionate about what we're doing, and we're putting our money where our mouth is. We are a group of students, retirees, scientists, teachers, attorneys, lots of faith-based leaders. We are all deeply concerned about the environment. I also wanted to I wasn't going to say this till later, but I think it bears repeating now, is that in the last couple of weeks, I've been talking to a lot of realtors, trying to get them to at least understand where we are with Reach codes and what's coming in the future. 2 out of the 3 I talked to said it is the wave of the future to be all electric. They see all electric as a benefit to sales prices and to sales, because we know that in time, all of our equipment is going to have to be replaced. Why not replace it now with all electric? I'm going to turn it over now to Megan Strain, who will talk a little bit about the imperative and what we need to do to meet 2030. Megan?
Thank you, Robert. My name is Megan Strain. I live in San Mateo. I'm 26 years old, and my partner and I are thinking about having kids, but it's hard to think about bringing kids into the world right now. That's kind of on this weird course. So as we know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has released studies suggesting that there's only just 7 or so years emitting greenhouse gases at our current rate before worldwide climate catastrophe. But I know that we don't have to wait 7 years to already see those climate disasters happening in our neighborhood. In the last few years, we've seen broken heat records, wildfire records, and other extreme weather, even just in San Mateo, where it's famously pretty mild. And all this climate change that we're going to be facing, definitely in my lifetime, and thinking about my children, certainly in their lifetimes, this is going to come at an incredibly high financial and human cost. So it's our view on our team that we must do everything in our power, use all the tools at our disposal to change the course as much as we can, even if it's just in our city. And the main way we're going to do that is to reduce carbon emissions as soon as we can. I know that climate change is definitely not the only issue going on in our community, certainly not the only issue going on worldwide, but we do need to act now or we're going to be leaving current and future generations an existential threat. Next slide, please. So our group has kind of a little roadmap to decarbonizing buildings and infrastructure by 2030. I think this is very aligned with what Andrea said today and a lot of the things that you guys have been working on. Like Robert mentioned, we suggest adopting the two-prong ordinance approach. So electrifying new construction by next year if we can, and to electrify new installations in existing buildings effective 2026 if possible. And along the way, we've got these other steps that are really going to help with decarbonization. Certainly, figuring out how we can educate residents and businesses to understand the benefits of electrification, the need for it, and also the health impacts of stopping fossil fuels in their homes. Like you guys talked about, like finding the funding that's going to support all electric, whether it's rebates or any kind of other financial support, developing the workforce and providing assistance to help the residents and businesses prepare for that switch, because it is going to be a pretty big change for a lot of people. And other things we have on the list is, updating with electric alternatives at replacement and avoiding stranded assets. So not installing a new gas stove if things are going to be changing to electric pretty soon. So these are all little parts of the roadmap to get to where we want to be in 2030. Next slide. So we are very thankful to live in San Mateo, where the city has shown so much leadership when it comes to climate action. Like honestly, like not just in our community or in California, but also showing the nation like what cities can do. So being one of the first cities in San Mateo County to adopt the REACH code, and then in the second cycle of REACH codes, once again being the first and receiving an award from Sustainable San Mateo. We're very proud of that. And so now coming up on the third cycle, we are really hoping that we can lead the way. The next slide, please. This kind of expands on kind of the leadership that we've shown. So since we adopted a REACH code, other cities have as well. And so it's really exciting to see that increase in incentives, increase in kind of that standard. There's implementation rebates that are available with PCE, BayREN, PG&E, and moving towards a stronger standards for existing homes and buildings. So we think this is definitely, part of that, and we want to continue building on that in our city. Next slide, please. So this just talks about some of the fossil fuels going on in our homes. So certainly there are carbon emissions, not just happening in commercial businesses, but also in our homes. People really like their gas stoves, and I understand that. But there are gas leaks that happen from gas stoves and from other gas appliances. Gas stoves also create some sort of kind of air pollution with it emitting gases. And there's evidence in health studies that children who grow up in a home that has a gas stove are much more likely to develop asthma. So this is just a reminder that, replacing with electric is not just an environmental benefit, but also a health benefit. Next slide. In this graphic, how kind of helps highlight, those gas leaks as well. So contrary to what some people may say, natural gas is not clean. It's contributing to, it's 97% methane gas, and burning methane contributes incredibly strong greenhouse gas. But besides its emissions, when we're using it to do things that we want it to do, it's also leaking from kind of across the entire spectrum, from when it's at the well's head to when it's over the transmission lines to when it's in our homes and we're using it. So there is a lot of leaks that are happening. So even just beyond the emissions when we're using it the way we want to. Next slide. This is just showing some really great electric alternatives for home appliances that are traditionally gas. And that includes stoves that aren't just kind of your traditional electric, but also induction stoves, kind of being like a good future option for that. And there's also electric alternatives in commercial buildings as well. On the next slide. So we're very lucky to live in an age where there are these options. And so I guess the main thing to do is get people on board and help people get ready for a switch that can be pretty expensive and kind of a cultural shift as well. Thanks, Robert.
The cost of saving and going all electric for existing buildings, the initial cost of switching can be incrementally higher, but your water heater, furnace, and stove will not last forever. Rebates are available from PCE, from Bayran, for Clean Tech and others, as high as $8,000. This can help stop the climate crisis. And electrifying HVAC and water heating can also lead to savings in energy cost savings per year. In my own home, the cost of operating our electrically powered heat pump water heater is about 25% less than the gas that we were paying for it before. I might also add that when I did replace our gas heater, the water heater, that we looked at the cost of replacing it in kind with gas, and I got a price of $2,100. When we replaced our heat pump water heater, the cost was $4,500, offset by a grant of $2,500, a rebate of $2,500. So the net cost to us was a push about the same. Somehow my thing is just, there we go. There are rebates, as I just mentioned. The rebates favor getting the larger water heater. We got an 80-gallon water heater because we can use our solar panels to power the water heater during the day, turn the temperature up to 140 degrees, and at night turn it down to 120. And we can store that power, that power all night, or heat all night long. So back to the two-pronged approach. If you look at this chart, one-stop shop assistance and help residents and businesses prepare for electric, the purple icon, the educating residents and businesses about electrification and the impacts of their little fossil fuel plants that Megan talked about, and then the citywide website. And the next was find funding and develop the workforce. Those are all things that nonprofits such as ourselves, nonprofits such as Sustainable San Mateo County, and the city are going to need to spend a lot of time in the next couple of years to develop. There are two things on here that the homeowner would do, and that's update with electric replacement and avoid stranded asset. On developing the workforce is still somewhat of a new item for some contractors. We're learning, though, that there are things that can be done to help them. The state of California has recently adopted a ruling through the State Contractors Licensing Board that plumbers and people who replace heat pumps can self-perform the electrical work so that the plumber does not have to hire a separate electrician and the homeowner does not have to run after and get an electrician. Here's how we would like to define new construction: new residential, commercial, and retail, remodels, ADUs and JADUs, effective January 1st, 2023. And I'm sorry for the 14 in the middle. That's the editor who is me. JADUs is an interesting one. I heard a discussion about that a few minutes ago. And JADUs, I think it would depend. If it's already something that's in a building and they're just moving somebody in, that's one thing. But if the building is going to be remodeled and you're opening up the walls, that would be the time to call it new construction and install all electric. Existing buildings and infrastructure. This is going to be the one where I guess the rubber hits the road. We think we should strongly encourage and support electrification before 2025, but at the same time, adopt a two-pronged ordinance this year that calls for new construction to be electrified and electrify new installations in existing buildings effective January 1st, 2026. That's going to require, in our opinion, significant outreach now through the end of 2025. It's going to require, we think, a location on this San Mateo website, some how to and frequently asked questions, some links, some rebates, and lots of other things. Financing is the one area that I'll spend a few more minutes time, a little bit of time on. Rebates, there is a thing called on-bill financing. Effective this summer, I was told by PCE that they will be offering loans of $10,000, which will be interest-free to replace heat pump water heaters and other gas-fired equipment. It'll be a interest-free loan. The other one is called tariffed on-bill financing, which is being sponsored by Josh Becker, and that would allow it to run with the property and would also allow the situation where a tenant wants to upgrade, but the landlord doesn't. So finally, we need to spend some time on what's called block power. It's being considered in Ithaca, New York. It's actually an operation in Ithaca. It's being considered in San Luis Obispo and as of last night in Menlo Park. So those are some specific funding sources in addition to block power, Be Smart, and PAYS. I think, Cookie, I'm out of time, but I do thank you for your time tonight. And there's a lot to be done yet. Our group is extremely interested in as strong a reach code as possible. And I suspect this won't be the first time we will be appearing before the commission. I do thank staff and I do thank the commission for taking up this very, very important item. Thank you.
Give me just a sec so I can promote them back to an attendee.
Sure. While this is occurring, anyone else in the Zoom meeting interested in giving a public comment, please use the raise your hand function in the Zoom meeting at this time. And Cookie, you just let us know once we're ready to proceed.
Okay, we can proceed now. Thank you.
Excellent. This is the time during which individuals can use the raise your hand function. Please do not delay. This is the time. I see 3 hands already, so we'll begin going, and Cookie can call on the next person, please.
Carol Seinfeld.
Hi, this is Carol Steinfeld. I just want to say we really need more outreach and public information about this effort, including of the installers. That should perhaps not just be done by our city, it has to be PCE. Perhaps all the municipalities get together with the county and work on this. And outreach really has to go to the ratepayers, not just posting websites or doing passive messaging. And here's a sad story. Our gas water heater died a few weeks ago, and the nonprofit that owns this cottage, as well as the plumbing installers they sent in, did not know about the electrification effort. So long story short, another gas water heater was installed. So we have to remember we're immersed in all of this information, but the public isn't getting the message across the board. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Blake Hershot.
Hi, my name is Blake Kershaft. I'm a programs manager with Peninsula Clean Energy. Thank you all for taking this topic up today. I just wanted to answer a few of the questions that seemed like they were going across the committee. So starting with new construction, Commissioner Nowinski, you had some questions here about specifically a single family 240 volt outlet for EV charging. Just so you know, the base code requires that there's a raceway for this outlet and enough capacity. So the only addition we're recommending is that there's a wire and an outlet added to that raceway so that you can easily plug in an EV. Generally, it's cheaper to build an all-electric single-family home than one with gas in it. For multifamily, there was a question whether we'd reached out to developers. We've coordinated with 5 developers while developing the ordinance, and they really helped us make sure that it had the least impact on cost. 2 of those are affordable housing and 3 are market rate developers. I've coordinated with some after they have worked through the code when they've been required to build all electric. And they have found that because of cost savings, specifically on solar hot water that's required in the base code for multifamily, it's essentially cost neutral to go all electric. So just wanted to share that. And just, you know, there were some questions on credentials. We have many engineers and architects on the Bay Area Reach Codes team. I hold a professional engineer's license in HVAC and plumbing design. So that's some background there. On existing buildings, I'm very sorry to hear about your experience on water heating. I am not aware of what occurred, but I apologize on behalf of Peninsula Clean Energy. As far as incentives, there are now incentives available that should cover the cost differential for the average electrification of a water heater instead of a gas replacement. But it will not cover it in all cases. It really is case by case. And that's a mix of statewide, BayREN, and Peninsula Clean Energy incentives. And they just came out in December. Also, because of those incentives, in all cases I can imagine for single family, the requirement of an air conditioner to be a heat pump also when an air conditioner is installed or replaced is going to save money. So that is a no cost incentive, or that's a no cost existing building measure at the moment. And that's something that would just be missed because the contractor wouldn't know to do that otherwise. As far as continuation of incentives, you bring up a really good point. Peninsula Clean Energy is committed to continuing incentives, especially for many income and wealth brackets that need those incentives. We believe that state incentives will continue at their current levels or higher. The governor is committing in the current budget $900 million for building electrification funding. But you are correct that you can't guarantee that they're going to continue. And I went over time, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Drew.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. So a few items. One, so about EV in homes and possibly in somewhat multifamily or duplex, or I was wondering also if townhouses that are 3 or 4 attached, are those duplex or are those are different things, but they have private garages and stuff. There's a number of those around San Mateo, but I would strongly recommend on the conduit for the other level 1 spot. There's talk of this level 1 ready. That conduit stuff that's put in is sized for level 2. I can understand the panel size might be an issue and some people might argue around, but if the level 2 charger needs to change location, it's much easier to do it. The cost increment to run a little bigger conduit is infinitesimal compared to having to go back later. That's different from the panel upgrade size. I can get that, and it'd be interesting to do some calcs where all this stuff, if it's forcing a panel to go from 200 amps to like a 400 amp. I know people in Palo Alto, 400 is pretty usual around there in some cases. Around here, my contractors like only deals with like 200 usually as a max. But there was another thing about panel upgrade. And I think if you're doing a panel upgrade, it should include all the electrical big things, because it didn't specifically say the water heater. And I think it should have any major electrical item that needs to be added. The panel upgrade should be including that. Now, again, that gets into total capacity, but I don't know why we would leave that out. You're required to do the kitchen or the dryer, but we wouldn't require, wait, you should be running cable to the hot water heater area at the same time. And another quote, just a thought that's, there's strong, like I support the direction, but I think there needs to be partially a realistic thing. I go into Home Depot, Osh doesn't sell any heat pumps at this point. Home Depot sells one, Lowe's sells one. There's like, we're on the leading edge, and we shouldn't force things ahead of, like, it's one thing to be leading. It's a whole nother thing to be forcing when there just aren't a lot of options yet. They're just starting to be options. Just recently, earlier this year, I saw Home Depot in an ad for the first time ever mention heat pump, hot water heater. I'd never seen that in an ad before. So there is progress coming, but I think it's a step function of the people that can deal with it the next for a while, and it slowly grows. That's part of how EVs have evolved, and people are buying EVs more and more and more and more because it's happening and stuff. So I'll end now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no other speakers.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I will close public comment and return to the commission for comments and recommendations. Andrea, if you'd like to reshare your helpful slides indicating the specifics that you'd like to receive input from the commissioners, that would be useful. I appreciate it. I would also just recommend that if commissioners have indeed made a number of comments during the question section, they don't necessarily need to repeat all of it. Perhaps it can be summarized. And I'll take hands and would like to begin with Commissioner Robbins, who has his hand raised. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will summarize. I've listened to everything and I appreciate it all. I do want to emphasize that the exceptions process on building, commercial building electrification just needs to be fair and responsive to the stakeholders. So I just want to note that again, because that could be a big issue in our town. On the EV side, I think this kind of was buried in some of the comments that the public made, I'll call the professional public in this case particularly. I think going back to level 1 for anything is just beyond the pale. We really should be doing level 2. It's just bigger conduit, and yes, it's a little more on the panel, but that's the future. And having a panel that can only support a bunch of old-fashioned 110 plugs in a multi-unit building is going to be very limited going forward. And then something we didn't talk about enough, though a couple of the speakers did, and I didn't have a question about it, but this is on the existing building changes. I would support your first 2 proposals dealing with panel upgrades. These would be triggers for when folks would have to comply with the new code. Yeah, 1 and 2 seem to make perfect sense to me. Having done remodels in the past, when you do something significant, it's going to be, you have to be up to code. And my house is over 100 years old, and I'm always finding something that wasn't up to code when it was first built, but now that we're doing it, we've got to do it. And the idea that the code would require increasing the panel capacity and putting the outlet that's already required in the kitchen to be put in the laundry room as well, or should be in the kitchen. So there's already some of it for your refrigerator if it requires it. That shouldn't be a problem. I'm not convinced that the heat pumps are ready for prime time yet. It's probably the future, but it's a big cost and timing hassle now, and availability problem. So I would not touch those. I wouldn't support touching those in reach codes right now. That's something, if incentives keep growing as PC and others are doing, that's great, but I don't think we're ready to mandate. That's the end of my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Going once. Okay. It's a little unorthodox, but I would be happy to go next if people want more time. Vice Chair, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks again to Andrea and Thank you to all the staff, and thank you to all the public for their comments. I really appreciate it. So on the new construction piece, the most, and I in full disclosure, I used to work in this space. So I worked on helping, for instance, San Jose at the time in 2019 pass their all electric reach code. That was the most ambitious reach code of a major big city, a top 10 city in the United States. And I've done other reach code efforts in other cities across the nation. So a couple things that are thematically really important for staff and for the city council to bear in mind. Developers need consistency and certainty. And so if we start to do our little futzing around the edges of something and all the other cities do that, the developers will have 50, 60, 70 different reach codes that they have to navigate. And the whole purpose, I believe, of the Bay Area Reach Code's model code is to avoid that exact situation. So while I personally don't love pieces of it, I've previewed, for instance, I'd rather, the affordable housing actually was the same, and that it, we actually now then instead of penalizing affordable housing residents by having less of like EV charging in their structures, for instance, in their homes, for instance, and having programming that would help to offset the costs, I will defer to the affordable housing developers who were consulted in this process. And I respect the thousands of hours that the experts, and thank you to the PCE staff for providing their public comment. I will defer to them on all of this, even though some of it, I'm not the biggest fan of certain parts. But the point is that consistency across the Bay Area, across multiple cities, across all of San Mateo County, across San Mateo County and Santa Clara, that is very, very important. And I want to tip my hat to all the staff and all of the experts and all the developers and everyone who came together to develop this, because it is really remarkable that there is this set of recommendations. And now it is up to city councils all across, the Bay Area to pass something consistent so that developers have that certainty and consistency, and that we don't create any sort of misaligned incentives to move development from one city to another just to try to game reach codes. This is the whole point. So I will accept and support the Bay Area Reach Code Model Code in full, despite my own personal, whatever. Along those lines, I want to emphasize a couple things as to my reasoning for this. We didn't talk about it, but I appreciate the public comment providing some of the recent research on the dangers of gas. It is very true that the term natural gas was something that was developed by the gas industry through marketing over several decades. There's wonderful YouTube videos about this. And the result, though, and the unfortunate reality we live in right now, is that we are just now starting to find out the true health impacts of gas in our buildings. There is a January 2022 study that was released by Stanford University that outlines the dangers of gas stoves and the methane leaks that are within homes that lead to not only increased asthma rates, but other health concerns, not only for children, but for adults. And they found that the leaking was happening while the stove was off. So just the sheer existence of that equipment inside your home is poisoning you. I have a gas stove. It is poisoning me. It is poisoning my 3-year-old kid. I'm freaked out about it. And that reality, even there's now going to be future studies done that will probably provide similar results for the other gas equipment in our home, because they all unfortunately leak and they all unfortunately use the same source of methane gas. So we are now saddled as a society with infrastructure that is harming our health. And it reminds me a lot of lead paint and asbestos that was used in insulation for roofs. And so how does one get to it through, through codes is important. The existing building part is going to be really, really tough. And to reinforce what other folks were saying from the comments and from my fellow commissioners, the public outreach and education here needs to be better. We also need to be more creative. So not only we need to start to flip our paradigm and our policy thinking, just as we did 5 years ago when we started to work on all electric building codes. 5 years ago, if you were to have told me that 53 cities would be passing all electric building codes within a few years, I would have thought that was crazy. And I've been working in climate my entire career. The point is that we need to be ambitious, and we actually do need to have forcing mechanisms to create the changes that we need to see. And now all electric building codes are normalized in California. That wasn't the case, that wasn't the case 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So every progress that we make, every ambitious step that we take, it always winds up being that later on, it feels more normal. This is going to be uncomfortable on the existing building side, but the reality is that we are allowing things in our homes to poison us. And when that happens in the past, we've stopped. We stopped using asbestos in insulation. We stopped using lead in paint. We need to stop using gas in buildings. To that effect, I support 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the list. I do not support 5 for all the reasons articulated by Commissioner Rinsky. This one goes too far at the moment. Because of the replacement issue with water and because of the safety risks of not having water in your home, this program needs a revamp. And along those lines, I want to go back to my question before, which starts to rethink the paradigm of who pays for what. A lot of the staff report talked about we need to get off gas and we need to center equity so that the poorest among our community who will be left behind, even built out from this reach code with like this whole EV charging situation that I don't love, they will be on a stranded asset of infrastructure. And so if there are people who want to keep their gas stoves because they're enamored with gas, if they want to keep their gas fireplaces because they're enamored with gas, if they are restaurants, and even after, despite all the education around the merits of cooking all electric, they still feel compelled to cook and use gas. At some point, not right now, but at some point, the city needs to plan to flip how it's thinking about these things so that the public is no longer subsidizing gas infrastructure, and instead those that are choosing to stay on it voluntarily pay for it. And then those who can't afford to pay for it because they're low income are actually the ones prioritized for all the programming and incentive programs in a very deliberate fashion and at scale. So that is how we will transition off of gas. At least that's one vision of how we'll transition off of gas. But we really need to stop thinking about gas as the default, as the baseline, and as like the normal thing, because it is going to be incredibly problematic in our near future. To that end, I would recommend looking at a sewer lateral-like program for heat pump water heating. It sounds like PCE has something like it, but we got a very oversubscribed, lovely sewer lateral program where we basically have $5,000 for homeowners who want to replace their sewer lateral because it's a city service also, right? It behooves the city that the homeowners do that. So let's think of it the same way with our gas infrastructure. It will behoove the city if people get off gas. And so why aren't we not paying homeowners to get this jump started in a very similar style of way? That's it for my comments.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Lewinsky, please go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. I am going to recommend that sometime in the future, possibly this discussion come back, Andrea, after you've kind of digested all of our comments and see where you are relative to what you've presented today. You mentioned there's a study session with council sometime in the July timeframe. So that would be for one of my first comments, both for new and existing. I still would like to see the city's exemption process and criteria, and if that could be sent to the commission and posted on the website for those who would be interested in also looking at this within the context of new commercial buildings. I also I heard enough about and agree with that maybe level 1 EV is not an effective investment. And so therefore everything should be at least a minimum of level 2 EV. I did hear that and can concur with that. But, you know, over on the existing, you know, I'm going to defer that really actually panel for this commissioner, items 1 and 2, I think is just about what's available for existing homeowners and residents, that is homeowners that live in single family homes, townhomes, restaurants, in that bit. I could see 1 and 2. Heat pump air conditioning, while I don't have personal experience with that, I've heard it is just as problematic. And also, by the way, also going back to a comment we heard from the public, still very leading edge, as well as heat pump water heaters as well, leading edge. Pools we don't have a lot of, so I can't speak to that. And I would also, Andrea, like to learn more about Senator Becker's proposed legislation to allow renters to modify or update their unit, their apartment, their home. That would be very, very interesting, I think, to get the renters involved too, because actually over half the city's occupants are renters. So 1 and 2, 3, 4, and 5, I think a little too early, and a big financial cost burden on residents, particularly those that live in homes and townhouses. Again, we want to bring them into the future. We don't want to dissuade them. We want to make this transition easy for these people and actually for everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay. All right. Thank you, Andrea, for going back and forth as people give comments on these. All right. I think with regard to my comments on new construction code recommendations, in general, I think I am aligned with everything Vice Chair Narita said. I want to thank staff for working hard on these and collaborating with the Bay Area Reach Codes group. I agree with some of the discussion that highlighted the benefits that come from shared resources, code uniformity, similar codes for countywide and perhaps beyond for developers, providers, installers, all the maintenance companies that are going to help make this implementation possible. And the consistency and certainty have me leaning toward approving and being recommending the Bay Area Reach Codes model code for all new construction. I'll also just note that there's been some discussion about level 1 versus level 2 spots, I guess, readiness as displayed here in the Bay Area Reach Model Code, I just wanted to point out that it seemed to me that even the Bay Area Reach Codes code is a substantial increase in level 2 EV charging spaces being proposed in addition to the level 1. So I mean, I think to Vice Chair Narita's comments, I would defer to those who had crunched the numbers on that particular point personally, and I'm satisfied with what's being presented as a mix, and yet a substantial increase in both, it seems to me, level 1 and level 2 spaces, with an eye toward cost equity, perhaps the reality of infrastructure currently available, and costs associated. Moving on to existing construction measures, I would agree with the Vice Chair that this is where we need to push the needle. And indeed, I feel like the city has had a history of doing this, and we have a role to play here again. I do think, as Commissioner Rowinski mentioned, that this topic should warrant another meeting with the commission before it comes to council in July. My understanding is that there is model language from the Bay Area Reach Code process still to come on existing buildings. And so we can have this discussion today. I think this has been productive, informative, and helpful. And I look forward to another bite at it after we've seen that model language. Andrea, you and staff have had a bit to think through tonight's discussion along with that, and see what whether recommendations might be different or anything else comes to light. But with that in mind, in terms of what we see before us at the moment, I also would support 1 through 4. And I think, before I forget, I want to mention with regard to number 3, the heat pump air conditioning, it seemed to me that we would want to tighten it a little bit, and perhaps require that the sizing of a new air conditioning unit installed be sized appropriately to fully replace and allow for the decommissioning of existing gas heaters, so that we definitely make sure anyone going through this process ends up with a heat pump that provides that dual use of heating and cooling, and that we end up fully replacing the gas heater. That would be my thought on number 3. As for number 5, I think I share the concerns other commissioners have brought up regarding the sort of cost burden this appears to be placing on residents potentially at this time. The other logistical challenges that were brought up in the presentation, and for an important utility that we all need. To me, though, this is just it's not a question of whether this needs to happen so much as when and how. And so let's see whether the model language from Bay Area Reach Codes has some ideas on whether there's a pathway here. So maybe we get to discuss that one again. Like, in addition to these 5, I would also like for this conversation, if you will, to include. I like Vice Chair's Narita's idea, what she brought up about looking to the sewer lateral ordinance for ideas on cost sharing with residents. That sounds like a great idea to help us bridge the gap for heat pump water heaters without necessarily mandating replacement at this time. I would like us to consider also potentially point of sale triggers. As Andrea mentioned, maybe it's not necessarily forcing a replacement at point of sale, but maybe instead, as Piedmont and other cities have done, Berkeley, conduct some sort of energy audit or score, and maybe through the kind of like benchmarking programs we've been talking about, sort of trigger a process that has the buyer understand next steps that may have to occur as we're looking toward these 2030 dates. I would like us to consider rebuild, remodel, retrofitting triggers that might make sense. Maybe it's something like what Burlingame has, or maybe it's something more like what Piedmont and Chula Vista have, that could trigger on renovation to provide efficiency electrification options. And I would definitely like us to please consider an end of flow date for gas, as Half Moon Bay has done, as others are moving toward. Maybe it's 2045, maybe it's 2030 in our case, given the mayor's priority, or maybe it's somewhere in between, something that would be found to be most appropriate for San Mateo after some more analysis. Would be, I think, very important to kind of set the signals that I feel the San Mateo Climate Action Team is mentioning is so important in their presentation to make sure that we're moving toward this, and that there are end dates and triggers to help us get there. I would like us to see. I would like us to at least include in the discussion pursuing measures that would have that would ask for us to make replacements at a future date, as opposed to maybe January 1st, 2023, as was suggested by the presenters. I do think it would still make number 5 tricky. I don't want us to get too fancy and paint ourselves into a corner. One thing that sort of strikes me about what was presented earlier by the San Mateo Climate Action Team is if we set a date of 2026 for implementation, I see that. I think the logic is setting it now allows for more of a ramp up and preparation, as opposed to waiting for like the next 3-year cycle and then simply setting something to take effect in 2026. There's the potential maybe for more momentum if we do it now. I also think, though, that of course there are trade-offs, and we could run into a situation in which we, with our 2023 lens, are making sort of requirements that perhaps don't pan out or make the most sense when we get around to the next cycle. So I think it would just be good to have this be part of the conversation, and perhaps when we meet again, we can see after that model language has come in, how staff feels about all of that. But yeah, I'm fine with splitting this process as needed. Commissioner Lewinsky mentioned having a second meeting and talking about both new and existing. I feel like I would hope that the discussion might be focused mainly on existing, given that's kind of the area in which we don't have the specific staff recommendations at this time. And just on a high level, of course, to wrap things up, I feel like we need to be doing as much as we can this year and going forward, for much of the reasons that have been shared by others. I'm interested in strong new construction codes, thanks to the Bay Area Reach Codes Group. Now I'm interested in strong signaling measures on existing buildings now or as soon as possible, potentially with some delayed implementation. I'm very interested in doing what we can to increase outreach, financing, and workforce training. The mayor has helped lead us in this direction with his priority that he brought to council, and the council continued and added to their strategic plan. Of course, what we mentioned in our climate action plan has this as a priority, and the IPCC report that was mentioned just makes this top of mind and very important that we do what we can. So those are my comments, and I see Commissioner Lewinsky has her hand raised.
I would just like to add another comment here. I forgot. I'm sorry, everyone. Earlier in the discussion, and I did see it with Mr. Whitehair's presentation, there was 3 groups that give that offer rebates of various amounts for various equipment. Now, and I really want everybody to think about this. Is there a way to streamline all of that into one clearinghouse to make that easy for our residents, both the residents and businesses, to take advantage of? I don't know if there's a lot of people who have the time to go into 3 separate agencies.
Chair,
apply
if I
for-
may, can I clarify?
Yeah, please.
So the table represents the different funding sources, but they are all delivered through one rebate program.
Oh,
So they're different funding sources, but they're delivered through bay rent rebates.
okay. So, all righty. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so I'm sorry that it looked probably a bit more complex than, yeah.
Right. Okay. So if I saw $1,500, that $1,500 was from those 3, and that was the cumulative from those 3 agencies.
But I guess the rebates can be layered on top of each other. And
Okay.
Peninsula Clean Energy, for example, is working directly with Bayren to make sure that San Mateo County residents are receiving this layered rebate. So it increases the funding available for specific projects.
Okay. All right. Maybe Andrea, we could take this offline.
Sure.
I want to make sure. I just want to make sure that's seamless. Thanks.
Thank you. And actually, I did think of one other thing that I wanted to make sure we, I brought it up, but I think Andrea, you also mentioned it. The City of Brisbane's benchmarking work seems to have borne some early fruit. I had the pleasure of attending the Sustainable San Mateo County's virtual happy hour right before our meeting that talked about building electrification, and Adrian Etherton from the City of Brisbane got to present a little bit on some early successes from that. So I hope we have an opportunity to keep our eye on that as we look into our own upcoming benchmarking work, and I imagine that'll play a role in some of this. There was also some other interesting material in there about the financing options that I think have been discussed, and so I'm looking forward to our next meeting on this topic. I'll maybe leave it there, and I thank everybody for joining us for that topic. Now we can move to reports and announcements. I would like to thank Andrea for the presentation and negotiating us through our comments. I hope you feel you've received what you need. Excellent. Good to check on that. Thank you. And now we can move to reports and announcements. And I would like to ask whether staff has any they'd like to share.
Yeah, if that's okay,
Of
I'd
course.
love to highlight some events and excitement around Earth Day. So Earth Day is this month, and the City Council has also proclaimed the month of April as Water Conservation Month. So I just want to highlight the things that you can do to conserve water. You can learn more about what you can do to conserve water by taking the My Water Pledge on behalf of the City of San Mateo. That's available at mywaterpledge.com. The San Mateo Library has developed 2 reading lists so that you can learn more about water-wise gardening and water conservation. Cal Water also has information on conservation tips and their turf replacement rebates and other rebates they have going on right now. And then separate from Cal Water, the City of San Mateo provides a rain barrel rebate through the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, BAWSCA, BAWSCA. And then finally, the city is also hosting an Earth Day photo contest again. So we're asking our community, what does it mean to be sustainable? What does that mean to you? What does that mean this Earth Month? And we'd love to see pictures and hear from our community on how they integrate sustainability in their daily lives. And there will be some fun prizes at the end of this month's competition. And anyone who lives or works in San Mateo is encouraged to participate. And then there are a series of events going on throughout our community around sustainability topics. Some are in person, some are online, but I want to, I shared a lot of information just now, but I can point everyone to the cityofsanmateo.org/ sustainability website to find more information on all of these Earth Month activities. And that's it for me.
Excellent, but that was quite a lot. So thank you very much, Andrea. And I'd like to ask if commissioners have any reports or announcements they'd like to share. All right, seeing none.
I'm sorry, I wanted
Sure.
to share one last announcement because it's really exciting. We just installed 13 level 2 EV chargers in our Main Street garage, and I would be sad if I missed the opportunity to announce that. They are installed in the basement level of the Main Street garage. So you need to enter on First Avenue in order to access the basement, but there are 13. They are ready to use. So very excited that that project is up and running before Earth Day. So thank you, and sorry for the interruption.
Huzzah! No, excellent. That is a great reminder, and thank you very much for this announcement. With that, and I'll concede that I wanted to make sure we talked about all the Earth Month activities going on in our city. I want to thank city staff for helping make those possible. Since Andrea has done so, I am going to adjourn this meeting and thank everybody for joining us. Good night.